I know we're close to lunchtime, so thank you, everyone. So this ties in nicely with everything that's been said earlier about humans and creating and interdisciplinary ways of working, and now with Joanna's work about choreography. And so I'm an artist slash researcher who is not a techie, but I'm learning how to use tech. A little bit of context. I'm a Spanish Gypsy woman who has been very fortunate to be educated. So my world in academia and as an artist, these kind of sometimes there was tension there. And they're now slowly starting to come together. And as a dancer who's creating work but also doing research with digital technologies, this was technology and this was me. And so I found, okay, how do I get around this? How do I tackle something that scares me? Well, there's an organization in Coventry, I work at Coventry Uni, called Ludic Rooms, and they have residencies for artists who are not tech savvy to learn to play. And so I was very fortunate to have an 8-month residency with them, where I started looking at how do I bring in these interdisciplinary ways of working and looking and the social political work I'm doing with the Romani Gypsy community and offering counter narratives, and how arts is an entry point to that, and what can dance do to support some of that work. So with the residency, I was looking at communities, storytelling, oral histories, people, and dance. And so I started looking at shadow puppetry. Something about this somehow resonated with me, and I started reading and looking, and this character, these are ancient characters that are within the Turkish community. He was actually considered a gypsy. And so his name is Black Eyes, Karagoz. And the more I started reading about it, there was this 28 became a very important number to the shadow puppetries, the structure. And I started liking this structure, this number 28, and I thought, well, how can I incorporate this into the movement, the work that I'm doing? And I started pulling some of the gestures and some of the imagery and started choreographing using the structures that I was learning about. At the same time of doing some of the work with the community I was taking that back to them and saying, oh, can you help me? How can we co-create? How can we build something together? So I was trying to use some of the old techniques that the shadow puppet is that the right way? We're employing, so to paint some of the shadow puppets, they'd make teas and then paint their beautiful shadow puppets. And I thought, oh, how lovely, I'll do this. And I tried it, and it didn't work. And I realized that I have no idea what I was doing, and how arrogant of me to go in and think I could just, read a couple books and learn to do this. So it was an eye-opener, and I thought, okay, I have to go back to what I know, which is looking at people, looking at the human side, and bring that into the technology. And so I started going to the markets and just having talks with people, and I met a guy who was selling me all of this, trying to sell me all of this material, and he said, why are you buying this stuff? And I said, well, I explained the residency, it's kind of the work I'm doing, the dances I'm trying to create. And he said, well, lots of gypsies buy this from me. And so I said, okay, fine. And then he started telling me stories around the material and where these items were coming from. There are all these beautiful stories. This Egyptian dancer who was also a gypsy, and how she had been collecting some of these things, and she was moving and shared these with him. And who knows if these are real? He could have just been making up things just to sell it to me, but I bought it. And then I started bringing back these pieces and the number 28 back to the community, and working with some of the humans. While I was doing that, I was still trying to get my head around laser cutting and how to make these puppets dance. And it was all still very confusing. As I was talking to the families, sharing, we'd get together and try and understand this equipment. There were all these dynamics of insider, outsider coming up again. And this was reflecting, I think, their realities of living in mainstream society but not being quite included for various reasons, which we're not necessarily here to talk about. But again, I started wondering how do I continue to bring those voices and those stories into the movement? And sometimes they'd offered me, you know, some gestures or some actual movement, and other times it was my interpretation. So we were playing. So this is kind of when we think about flamenco. There, you know, we think about the big dresses, the colorful, the all of these aspects. And what happens when we take that away? We ask the machine to help us create some movement. But still keeping the human element and keeping some of those stories that I was learning and collecting and kind of reinterpreting. And at the same time, I was doing so these stories and the dances and number 28 and all of this choreography that I was making was feeding directly into a project I'm doing at the Center for Dance Research at Coventry Uni, which is around motion capture and building a repository of dance, of data, 5 minutes, that is all about the body and the machine, and not about any of the flesh of the kind of the things we typically see when we think about dance. So I love Joanna's kind of mix on kind of combining these two worlds. It's really beautiful. And so here is what we produced. We came up with all of this choreography that was created alongside the community and with the community, feeding into this motion capture work, and then we're taking all of the extras away, and it's just about, you know, these points. And I just was really excited that, you know, here this machine was kind of choreographing it. And, you know, what happens when we take that back to the community? And, you know, then they started getting quite inspired and saying, well, what if we did this, and what if we tried this? And, you know, they then made music, and then there was some of the kind of other cultural elements starting to come back in. And going back to the residency, I was saying, okay, so we have the physical kind of embodiments and the choreography they're feeding into the work. How can we bring their physical voices into this? So if you remember my mistake of the painting, so I had to clean up my mistake. And I was using these sponges, and I thought, well, what if I just started painting the sponges and then connected my Arduino board to that, and then their voices could be part of that. And there are all these ideas around, you know, the gypsies being dirty. So all of that was kind of coming into this work. And suddenly I had this, you know, their voices were part of these sponges that were clearly, that were influencing the movements and the kind of circularness of the choreography that we had created, I should say. And again, these are just some of the people that were part of that work, and linking the motion capture and that work that was very scary to me, of taking flamenco into this kind of new domain, and, you know, working with Arduino boards. But then towards the end it was fine, because the families and the voices were still had a place in that, and we didn't remove that human element that was, you know, one of my fears. And so I went back to just trusting what the body knows, and that there's something, that intrinsic kind of embodied knowledge is as important as is the technology, and as, you know, the work that can be done with these tools. So thank you. Yes.
So again, can you go through again, what did you use Arduino for in the end?
To connect the sponges to the voices. So the Arduino, this was a wire that was, and this was electrical paint, and the Arduino was programmed that when you moved in front of these sponges, sorry, I didn't say that, their voices would come up. So there was this part of the installation that was projecting that motion capture video that actually, I forgot to say that, I made alongside the community. If you're interested, we can see what that looked like. That's projected there. I dance in front of this, and alongside of that were the voices that you could also engage and hear their own interpretation of what 28, of what home means, of what it means to work with technology, and kind of be part of the process of making. And also keep in mind, this is a community that, if I'm afraid of technology, they're very afraid of technology. So it offered, towards the end, a creative output in a form of agency for them, and to think about what's possible with art. And in that, we created something that was now within the European Commission Horizon 2020 project, where they're not supposed to be there. So they directly influence choreography that's being used by this project, and there's still this quite polemic community. So yeah. Yes.
Can you talk a bit more about that interaction of the technology with the community? Did you feel like you had to somehow hide the technology a little bit, or were they quite open? What were the sort of responses you got?
In the beginning, I felt like I had to protect them, but I realized I didn't want my mentor to do that for me. So it was a strange kind of power play there. And then I just said, well, this is it. I don't really know what I'm doing, but together we can figure it out. And then it became more about playing and imagination. So rather than use for the film we made, rather than use Final Cut Pro, I used QuickTime. So that was a decision, but I felt time. So maybe I did change it a little bit, but I still let them kind of make the major decisions in the creating of that, yeah. Sorry, I threw a lot at everyone. I know it's lunchtime, so yeah. Yeah, thank you.